Okay. So good afternoon, students. Today we will be discussing about chapter 2, that is human reproduction. In human reproduction, we will be studying about different topics. Number 1, we will be discussing about the male and female reproductive system. In that, we are going to talk about the anatomical part of it. Anatomical means the structures, different organs, different glands which is there in the male as well as female reproductive system. Second one, we will be discussing about the gametogenesis. Third one is the menstrual cycle. Then the last part of it, fertilization, maintenance of pregnancy, maturation and lactation. Okay. So today we will be concentrating on a topic called menstrual cycle. Why we are discussing today menstrual cycle is, in this chapter, two topics are very important. Number 1 is menstrual cycle, second one is gametogenesis. In all the question papers, last 16 years, 17 years question paper if you check, all the question papers at least this question will be there, menstrual cycle or gametogenesis. Okay, so very important, at the same time very easy to study and remember. So we'll go with menstrual cycle. Okay, right. Now, whenever you study a topic, you should know why and what about this topic. Now, when you talk about menstrual cycle, what is this menstrual cycle? In menstrual cycle, there are changes takes place. Menstrual cycle is the changes. Something that is undergoing changes. So these changes are in 3 different areas that takes place in the female reproductive tract. So that means the menstrual cycle will take place in the female reproduction or in the female reproductive tract. Now, what this menstrual cycle is? It is a changes that takes place in 3 areas. Number 1, it takes place in the female uterus. Number 1, okay, where the changes are in the uterus. Number 2, it is taking place in the ovary. Okay, ovary is a female reproductive organ, primary reproductive organ. And the third one, this menstrual cycle takes place, the changes that takes place in the ovarian hormones. Clear? So this is what menstrual cycle is. Menstrual cycle means a change that takes place in 3 different areas in the female reproductive tract. Number 1 is, it takes place in the uterus. Second one, it takes place in the ovaries. And the third one is the changes that takes place in the ovarian hormones. Understand? Clear? Now, what is this ovarian hormones? There are 2 hormones which is involving in this menstrual cycle. One is called the estrogen hormone and the second one is called the progesterone hormones. So these 2 hormones are the ovarian hormones. Okay, so that means the change that takes place in this hormone, whether the hormone increases, whether the hormone decreases. Clear? So now you got what is menstrual cycle is. A menstrual cycle is nothing but the change that takes place in the uterus, the change that takes place in the ovary, and the change that takes place in the estrogen and progesterone. Clear? Right. So now, why, second question, why this menstrual cycle is taking place? Now, this menstrual cycle takes place for 2 reasons. Number 1, it is for fertilization. You know what is fertilization? What is fertilization? A fusion of egg, a fusion of the sperm cells. So when an egg cell as well as when the sperm cells are fused each other, it becomes zygote. Okay, so that is called fertilization. So this menstrual cycle will take place for two reasons. Number one is for fertilization. Second one, it is for pregnancy. For these two reasons, the menstrual cycle will take place. Either to maintain or not, or either to fertilize or not. So because of this reason, the menstrual cycle takes place. Got it? Right. The third one is when this menstrual cycle takes place. When? Now, in female, this menstrual cycle takes place at the time of puberty. That is between 11 to 14 years. So when puberty is? Between 11 to 14 years. Clear? Got this one? Right. So now, when this menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty and it stops at the age of 45 to 50, and this stage is called menopause. So the stopping of menstrual cycle is called menopause. That means the first menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty. The first menstrual cycle is called menarche. Don't forget it. Very important question is. So far we are discussing about the menstrual cycle that takes place in your female reproductive tract. Now we discussed what this menstrual cycle is. It means changes that occurs in the uterus, ovary as well as ovarian hormones. That may be increases or decreases of estrogen and progesterone. These two hormones are involving for menstrual cycle as well as for the pregnancy and all this. And why it should happen? For two reasons, for fertilization as well as for pregnancy. And the third one is when this menstrual cycle should take place. When it happens, it starts at puberty between 11 to 14 years and stops by 45 to 50. That is called menopause. And the starting of that menstrual cycle is called menarche. This much you are clear? You understand? Right. So now we will be discussing about these changes alone in detail. Clear? Right. So now here, when you talk about the uterus, suppose if this is the female uterus, this is the uterus, and the uterus will be inside lined with a membrane. And this membrane is called endometrium. Okay? The lining of the uterus is called endometrium. All these are technical words. Understand? First time you are learning, but still you remember endo means inside. Okay? Endometrium means a layer which is present inside this uterus is called endometrium. Now the role of this endometrium is the endometrium where it becomes stronger because of these hormones, and this endometrium gets stronger, and for this reason called implantation process. Implantation means nothing. When the egg which is released from the female reproductive tract, whether it is getting fertilized or not, the egg should come and fix inside this wall and remain there. If this is getting pregnant, it is fertilized, it will remain there for 9 months for undergoing pregnancy. Suppose if it is not getting fertilized, unfertilized, it will go out through menstrual cycle. So endometrium, the role of endometrium is implantation, is fixing of this ovum into this endometrium. Egg fixing to the membrane called endometrium. So that is what implantation is. Now you know the role of endometrium, implantation. Where the endometrium is? It is in the uterus, in the lining of the uterus. Okay. So in every menstrual cycle, what is happening is changes that should happen in the uterus. So what change that takes place? This endometrium, either it is degenerated, that means removed fully, or either it is regenerated. So in every menstrual cycle this happens. That means this endometrium will go off or the endometrium will again start generating. So that is the changes that takes place in the uterus. You understand now what is changes that takes place in the uterus? Because of the degeneration and regeneration of the endometrium. That is number one. Clear? Right. Second one, the change that takes place in the ovary is nothing but the removal of the ovum. So that means every egg will be, this is an egg, primary, this egg is called primary oocyte. Okay. So now, as a female child is formed in the womb of the mother, till her birth, there are millions of primary oocytes will be there in her ovaries. Clear? And these primary oocytes will be surrounded by a layer outside, and that layer is called primary follicles. This is called primary follicles. So primary oocyte will be surrounded by a layer outside called primary follicles. Now, after puberty, this primary follicles or the primary oocyte will enlarge in size. It is enlarging. When it is getting enlarged, this primary follicle will be converted into another structure called secondary follicles. Okay? So, before birth till puberty, inside the ovary we have primary follicles, and after puberty you have so many millions. So after the birth it remains around 6,000 to 8,000, although data are not in the book, so don't worry. So what is happening to the primary follicle after the female child is undergoing puberty? After the puberty, this primary oocyte or primary follicle will be converted into secondary follicles. Clear? Now that means the primary follicle also will be matured into, secondary oocytes. The primary oocytes will be matured into secondary oocyte. That time the primary follicle will be converted into secondary follicles. So then, now afterwards what happens? This will be again further converted into tertiary follicles, and finally it is matured into Graafian follicles. So everything that takes place inside the ovaries. What is happening? Primary oocyte is there. This primary oocyte will be covered up by a layer called primary follicles, and later on, when a girl child is attaining puberty, this primary follicle will be converted into secondary follicle. At the same time, the primary oocyte will be converted into secondary oocyte. Then again it is developed, matured, and it is getting converted into tertiary follicles, and then finally tertiary follicles, and then finally it reaches the Graafian follicles. Clear? So inside the Graafian follicle, we will always have this secondary oocytes. Okay, we will call egg or ovum only when the female child is undergoing fertilizations. Before fertilization, all the stages we will talk only about the secondary oocyte. Okay, right. So now here, these are the changes. Now what happens? This Graafian follicle mature, and the Graafian follicle will rupture and release the egg. So the egg will come out. Always, whenever the egg comes out from the ovary, this process is called ovulation process. Okay, ovulation means egg from the Graafian follicle comes out. So Graafian follicle ruptures, releases the egg. That process is called ovulation process. Is that clear? Right. So all these things are taking place inside the ovaries. So that is the chain that takes place in the ovary. So during menstrual cycle, a chain that takes place in the uterus is about the endometrium. The chain that takes place in the ovaries, the development of primary follicles into secondary, tertiary follicles and Graafian follicle. By the time ovum will be developed developed from primary to secondary. Okay, so that is what changes that takes place in the ovaries. And the third one, in all these steps, this estrogen hormone and the progesterone hormone will increase and decreases. So this is the change that takes place in the three different areas in the female reproductive system regarding the menstrual cycle. Still now we are studying only about the basic ideas regarding menstrual cycle. So now you know what menstrual cycle is, why it takes place, when it starts, when it ends, and what are all the changes that takes place. All things you are clear on. Correct? Okay, now we'll study about this menstrual cycle in detail. Okay. Now we know in menstrual cycle the changes that takes place in three areas. Now, what are those areas? Uterus, ovaries, beautiful, ovarian hormones. What change takes place in the uterus? A membrane called endometrium. What happened to that endometrium? Degenerate and regenerate. Very good, very good. What is happening in the ovary? Primary oocyte will be converted to secondary oocyte. That means membrane, primary follicle is converted into secondary follicles, tertiary follicles and graphene follicles. And ultimately what is happening to the graphene follicle? It ruptures and releases. That process is called ovulation process. Very good. That changes in the ovary. So the first change that takes place in the uterus regarding the what? Endometrium. Second change that takes place in the ovary. So we will call it as ovary. And the third one is taking place in the ovarian hormones. So I have divided this entire thing into three. Here we will study about what are all changes that takes place in the uterus muscle. Clear? And here at the top we will be talking about what are all the changes that takes place in the ovary. So you know what are the changes. Okay. And here we are going to concentrate about the hormones. What are the hormones? Estrogen and progesterone. What is happening to those hormones? It increases or decreases. So that is what we are going to see. Okay. Now, the entire menstrual cycle works out in the presence of these hormones. Okay. So in menstrual cycle, which is more important is the level of hormones. Okay. And all these hormones are under the control of a gland called pituitary gland. Why? Already we have studied in 11th standard. The pituitary gland is called the master gland, which is having two parts in it. The anterior part is called adenohypophysis and the posterior part is called neurohypophysis. Anterior part secretes 6 hormones that we have studied. What are all those hormones? Growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Next one is FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone and LH. Okay. Here in this menstrual cycle, we are going to concentrate on these two hormones, FSH and LH. Follicle stimulating hormone. Because why we are taking up these hormones is, in ovary, what are the changes that we study? The primary follicle will be converting into secondary follicles, tertiary follicles. All these are follicles. Follicle is nothing but a cube-like cells, a cup-shaped cells. Okay. So now, in this menstrual cycle, the follicles has to develop, has to undergo maturation, convert into another structure, and it will rupture. So for all this, you need the development of follicles. Okay. So ovary will synthesize two hormones, ovarian hormone. What are those hormones? Progesterone and estrogen. But these are all the ovarian hormones. Otherwise, we will call these hormones as gonadal hormones. Why gonadal hormones? Because it is synthesized or secreted inside the gonads of female. Since it is secreting in the ovary of the female, gonads of the female, these two hormones, what are all those hormones? Estrogen, can you see there? Estrogen and another one is called the progesterone. These two hormones are the ovarian hormones or gonadal hormones. Why? Because it is secreted inside the gonads. Okay, but these two hormones are under the control of FSH and LH. Okay, we studied pituitary will have always stimulating hormone. It produces an hormone called stimulating hormone. So those hormones will enter into the gonad for stimulating. So all these two hormones are under the control of FSH and LH. Okay, so that is the reason in pituitary we are going to concentrate on these two hormones FSH and LH. So throughout this menstrual cycle we are focusing on the changes in the uterus, endometrium wall, the changes in the ovarian hormones, progesterone, estrogen level, whether it falls or increases, and the changes in the ovary where the follicles are developing, converting and become into finally Graafian follicles. In between stages you know. So always throughout the cycle primary oocyte will be converted into secondary oocyte, that much. Then we also have to study about the role of FSH and LH. So this is what regarding all the basic content about the menstrual cycle. Okay, right. So now here we will talk this menstrual cycle in 4 different stages. Stage 1, 2, 3 and 4. So these 4 stages are: number 1, the first stage here, it is the menstrual phase. The first stage is called menstrual stage, or it is otherwise called as menstrual phase. The first cycle. Okay, right. I supposed to write here, but still. So this area we are going to talk about the menstrual phase. Right. Now listen carefully. Very important. If you listen to this flow chart, you can very easily within 5 to 10 minutes you can study this chart. Okay, right. So what is the first phase in the menstrual cycle? Now, what is the first phase in the menstrual cycle? It is the menstrual phase. Okay, menstrual phase. Right. Now, this menstrual phase here, the change that takes place in the uterus is the wall in the uterus is called the endometrium will start degenerated. So, endometrium should go up. But here, what is happening? The level of the endometrium is decreased. So, here, this is the endometrium. So during menstrual phase, the lining of the uterus, which is called endometrium, it is start to degenerate. You know what is degeneration? Removal of endometrium from the uterus. That is number 1. Okay. So during menstrual phase, what is happening? In the uterus, endometrium degenerates, goes up. Okay. Now, what is happening in this ovarian hormone? Whenever this endometrium is degenerated, there is an hormone called progesterone. This progesterone will undergo decreases. This is going down. So this color indicates progesterone, which goes low. So progesterone comes down. So during menstrual cycle, which ovarian hormone decreases? Progesterone. So that means it is clear, whenever progesterone is there, endometrium will be there. Endometrium will be there in the uterus. Whenever the progesterone is lower, whenever the level of progesterone is decreases, what is happening to the endometrium?
The endometrium degenerates.
Understand? So during menstrual cycle, the change in the uterus is degeneration of the endometrium. Number 1. Because of this, who is responsible for this degeneration? What is happening to progesterone? Decreases. Understand? Lowers. Now listen. Here during menstrual cycle, ovaries, we are not going to study any changes at the time of menstrual cycle, menstrual phase. Okay, right. So now, this low level of progesterone, you have progesterone is low. Okay, so the low level of the progesterone, this hormone will stimulate the gland called pituitary. I just write here so that you can. It is the gland called, this is the structure of pituitary. Okay, so now the low level of the progesterone will stimulate this pituitary gland to produce an hormone called FSH hormone. What is FSH hormone? Follicle stimulating hormone. Okay. So that means if it is called follicle stimulating hormone, means inside the ovary will there be follicle or not? Why no? Because now only what is happening? Follicle stimulating hormone is synthesized, secreted. So that means it is indirectly mentioned that during menstrual phase there is no follicles. That is the reason I kept empty this box. In ovary, what changes we studied? Primary follicle has to convert into secondary follicle, tertiary graphene. But here now only the follicle is going to begin. So that means inside the ovary, who is not there? Follicles are. We are not going to talk about the follicles. Clear? So this phase, menstrual phase, in the menstrual cycle, the first phase is called menstrual phase. In first phase, in the uterus, what is happening? Endometrium nothing goes off because of progesterone level decreases. Clear? So this low progesterone will stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete an hormone called follicle stimulating hormone. Okay. This phase will take place between 3 to 5 days. So always the menstrual phase menstrual phase takes place between 3 to 5 days. And we discussed about when this menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty. Till menopause, every month this menstrual cycle takes place between 28 days, 28 to 29 days. And it also varies. Okay, right. One thing I just wanted to tell you, when this menstrual phase stops, we study. When this menstrual phase stops? During menopause. Now, not only during, when a female attains at the age of 45 to 50, there is no menstrual cycle. Okay, menstrual cycle will not take place during or at the time of pregnancy. Okay, everyone knows at the time of pregnancy there is no menstrual cycle. There is a reason why we will discuss in the other class. One more thing, at the time of lactation, soon after the delivery, if there is a lactation for 6 months, that lactation period also is an absence of menstrual cycle. So there is no menstrual cycle after menopause, number one. There is no menstrual cycle during pregnancy, no menstrual cycle during lactation. If there is a decline in this hormone, there is no menstrual cycle. There is no estrogen, progesterone disorders in the hormone, there is no menstrual cycle. Whenever a female is undergoing stress, no menstrual cycle. Okay? And there are certain reasons that we will discuss later. Another one is, if a female child is undergoing anemia. What is anemia?
Low iron.
Reduction of RBC. If there is no RBC, reduction of RBC leads to anemic. So all these are the reasons for there is absence of menstrual cycle. Number one is after menopause. Number two, pregnancy. Number three, lactation. No menstrual cycle. Then stress. Hormone changes. Okay, disorder in the hormone. Then finally anemia. For all this, there is no menstrual cycle. Okay. Now this phase, you are clear? Menstrual phase.
Yes.
Menstrual phase begins from 3 to 5 days. What is happening in the uterus? Endometrium degenerates. What is happening in the ovarian hormone, gonadal hormone? Right. Whenever you call these two hormones gonadal hormone, these two hormones are called gonadotropic hormones. Tropic means stimulating. Okay, since it is stimulating the gonads to produce their hormones, these hormones are called gonadotropic hormone, and these two hormones are called gonadal hormones. You know the difference between gonadal and gonad hormone? Gonadal from pituitary, gonads from the reproductive part of the female or male. Understand? Right. So this is the phase number one. Clear? Right. So now here what happens? the low level of the progesterone stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete an hormone called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Right. Now what is happening here is this follicle stimulating hormone will enter into the ovary. Who is responsible for follicle stimulating hormone? Low level of progesterone. Okay. Now inside this ovary, this follicle stimulating hormone will develop those follicles. Okay. So number one, already the story we have discussed. This is the primary oocyte, will be surrounded by the primary follicles. PF primary follicle. Then it will undergo a structure called secondary follicles. Then it will undergo a structure called tertiary follicles. Then it forms a structure called Graafian follicles. So now the Graafian follicle is developed. This is called follicle stimulating hormone. Now whenever the progesterone is low, FSH hormone is synthesized, and in the ovary it develops the follicles, primary, secondary, tertiary, and all this. It is developed. Okay, right. So now, whenever the Graafian follicle is there, remember, whenever Graafian follicle is there, inside this ovary, a ovarian hormone which is produced is called estrogen. Now, the estrogen level is increased. Clear? So here we studied an hormone called progesterone. What is happening to the progesterone? Decreases. This is a color which indicates progesterone, and this color is indicating estrogen. Now, whenever Graafian follicle is there, definitely there will be an increase of estrogen. And whenever estrogen is there, don't forget it, the endometrium will start regenerated. See, if this is the endometrium will start regenerated. Here it decreases. Here regenerates. The endometrium degenerated by an hormone called progesterone is not there. Endometrium regenerated by an hormone called estrogen. Okay. So now, since follicle stimulating hormone involves in the development of follicle, and the Graafian follicle which is responsible for synthesizing of hormone called estrogen, endometrium start regenerating. So we can write here endometrium regenerated. Okay. So this phase, the phase 2, is called the follicular phase. I will write it here. It is called the follicular phase. This is the second phase. The first phase is called menstrual phase. The second phase is called follicular phase. This phase takes place. The data are not there in the book. Still 6 to 13 days. Any doubt regarding these two phases?
No.
Any doubt? Are you very clear? Very clear. Two phases we thought. 3 changes. So far we actually 4 phases. 2 we have discussed. 3 changes. Can you tell me what are the changes? 3 changes. Where are it takes place? Uterus. Ovary. Third one? Ovary. Beautiful. Right. Now so far we have discussed about menstrual phase and follicular phase. Why follicular phase? You understand. Because of the development of follicles. What is the development of follicle? Primary follicle is converted into secondary, tertiary. Very good. Beautiful. Right. Who's there inside the Graafian follicle? Now, my question is, who's there in the primary follicle? Hey, who's there inside the primary follicles?
Oocyte.
What kind of oocyte?
Primary.
Very good. Primary oocyte. Who's there inside the secondary follicle? Secondary follicle. Oocyte. Who's there in the tertiary? There is no tertiary follicles. Only 2, primary and secondary. Beginning itself I told you, entire female reproductive life, unless and until the female is undergoing fertility. If she is becoming fertilization or pregnant, then only it will undergo into egg. Otherwise, only 2 process. Primary oocyte, secondary oocyte. That means an indirect 1-mark question. Tell me, in every menstrual cycle, whether it is egg or secondary oocyte goes off.
Secondary.
Why secondary oocyte?
Except pregnancy.
Beautiful. If a lady is attaining pregnant, then only it is called oocyte, egg. Egg is developed after the fertilization. Before the fertilization, there is no egg, only secondary follicles. So in menstrual cycle, we are not going to concentrate on egg. We are going to concentrate only about secondary follicle. Every matured female will have secondary oocyte. Before puberty, primary oocyte. After puberty, till fertilization, secondary oocyte. After fertilization, it becomes ovum or egg. This much you are clear? Clear? These two phases are very clear. Right. So in menstrual phase, low level of progesterone. In follicular phase, high level of estrogen. Clear? Right. Now, we'll talk about. So now inside this graphene follicle, you will have primary follicle or secondary follicle or egg.
Egg.
Primary follicle, inside you will have primary oocyte. Secondary follicle, you will have tertiary follicle, you will have secondary oocyte only. Inside the graphene follicle, secondary oocyte only. That's what I am telling. In menstrual cycle, we are going to study only about the secondary follicle oocytes. Is that clear? You understand what I am saying? There is no ovum in the menstrual cycle because the girl is not fertilized. After fertilization only it becomes ovum, egg. Till that it is being arrested in secondary oocyte. Why? That we will study tomorrow in gametogenesis. Why this female is not having egg till fertility? There is a reason for it. Understand? So always till the female is getting married, by the time till it remains as a secondary oocyte only. Before puberty, primary oocyte. After puberty, till she is getting married, she will have only secondary oocyte. Got it? That means who is there in the secondary follicle? Secondary follicle. Secondary oocyte. You are also secondary oocyte. You are also secondary oocyte. You are also secondary oocyte. Okay. This secondary oocyte inside the graphene follicle has to come out. Has to come out. Because it is a matured one. Whenever the secondary oocyte is getting matured, all these processes are developing process. Here it is getting matured. Whenever the secondary oocyte, which is inside the graphene follicle, is matured, it should rupture the graphene follicle and the egg. So I put it here. This is all the egg, not egg actually, secondary oocyte. This secondary oocyte has come out. It has come out. So what happened here? What happened here?
Rupture.
Which is rupture? Very beautiful. Graphene follicle rupture. Who is released? Secondary oocyte is released. Okay. Remember, estrogen hormone here in this phase is increased more. One part, whenever this estrogen is there, so you have high level of estrogen, high estrogen. Here we study low progesterone. High level of estrogen will stimulate an hormone called LH, luteinizing hormone. Okay, low level of progesterone, FSH. High level of estrogen, LH hormone. Now LH hormone enters inside. Because of LH hormone, graphene follicle rupture, ovum comes out. That time the same estrogen will be increased more. Okay? Here estrogen is increased. We have not studied about any decreasing at all. Here the LH hormone is there. The LH hormone level will be very peak, very high during this condition. In this condition, the ovarian hormone called estrogen is increased more. The pituitary hormone called LH is increased more. So this phase is called, here in this situation it is called LH surge. Surge means increases. LH is more, that means LH is increased. Is that clear? Right. So here you will find high level of estrogen will stimulate LH hormone, and this LH hormone will involve in removing the ovum, secondary oocyte from the graphene follicle. So this phase is called ovulatory phase. Ovulatory phase. First phase is called menstrual phase. Second phase is called follicular phase. Third phase is called ovulatory phase. Understand? Right. So this takes place 6 to 13 days, and ovulatory phase is only 1 day, 14th day. So only 1 day the egg will come out of the womb. Only 1 day. So 24 hours. Within that time, the egg should, this secondary follicle should get fertilized. Otherwise, it will go for menstrual cycle. You are clear? Once again, I just go this. During menstrual cycle, uterus, endometrium, regenerate. So what is happening? Progesterone level lowers, decrease. Beautiful. In ovary, nothing we have wasted. So this low level of progesterone will stimulate pituitary gland to produce FSH hormone. Understand? FSH hormone enters into the ovary and forms primary follicle to get converted into all this process. Okay, all this. Then graphene follicle is there. At the time, estrogen is increased. Whenever graphene follicle is there, estrogen will be there. Graphene follicle is not there, only estrogen will not be there. Right. So now estrogen increase, endometrium will start. So right, very good. So now here what is happening? This high level of estrogen will influence an hormone called LH hormone. By the time graphene follicle ruptures, releases the ovum, ovulation. Okay, this phase is called ovulation. That time this endometrium becomes thicker like this in the uterus. Regenerate nothing. Regenerated, this becomes stronger, thickens during ovulatory phase. Okay, right. Now, here in this finally, you got only graphene follicle. There is no ovum. Gone. In the fallopian tube, it has gone. So ovum is removed, egg is removed, secondary follicle. Now this graphene follicle, after the ovulation, it forms an empty structure like this temporarily. A small structure is formed. This structure is called corpus luteum. Don't forget it. If corpus luteum is there, there is no egg inside. No graphene follicles. Graphene follicle rupture, ovum is released. The graphene follicle will convert it into another structure called corpus luteum. Understand? Whenever corpus luteum is there, okay? Whenever graphene follicle is there, means estrogen will be there. Now graphene follicle is not there. What will happen to estrogen? If there beautiful. Okay, I have not mentioned, it is understood. Graphene follicle is there means definitely you will have high level of estrogen. Okay, high level of estrogen is there means it influences LH hormone. Now graphene follicle is not there. Naturally, what will happen to estrogen? Decreases. Right. Now here, this structure change into corpus luteum. Corpus luteum, whenever corpus luteum is there, the hormone called progesterone increases. So there, progesterone increases. There, lowest, here increases. So corpus luteum secretes an hormone called progesterone. Understand? Whenever corpus luteum is there, progesterone. Okay. If progesterone is there, corpus luteum will be there. This will always only for fertilization process. If the ovum is fertilized, egg is fertilized, secondary follicle is fertilized, corpus luteum will be there till 9 months. Progesterone will be there till 9 months. That is why progesterone is called pregnancy hormone. It maintains pregnancy. Why? All this we'll study afterwards. So during corpus luteum, whenever corpus luteum is there, progesterone will be there and this will be maintained up to fertility. Okay, so that means for 9 months, corpus luteum will be there at the time of pregnancy. If there is no fertilization, corpus luteum will not be there. Understand? Right. So now, this corpus luteum secretes an hormone called progesterone. Now this endometrium becomes more thicker like this. Endometrium regenerated without progesterone. Endometrium made more stronger with progesterone. Okay. So now this corpus luteum secretes an hormone called progesterone. Till if it is fertilization, it will remain. By the time endometrium is made strong. Okay, so this phase, the last phase is called, since it is secreted by corpus luteum, this is called the luteal phase. Menstrual phase, follicular phase, then here you will have the ovulatory phase, here I have written, then the third one is called luteal phase. This phase 15 to 28 days. 15 to 28 days. Okay, so 28 days for a menstrual cycle. Okay, this is only for at the time of fertility. Fertilization means corpus luteum will be there, progesterone will be there, endometrium is made thicker, more stronger. Okay, why? Beginning itself I told the egg will come and sit implant on the wall of the endometrium, so it should be more stronger. Suppose if there is no fertilization, this is only for fertility. If there is no fertilization, what will happen to this corpus luteum? The corpus luteum will convert into another structure called corpus albicon. Fertilization is there means corpus luteum. Fertilization is not there means corpus albicon. Corpus albicon is there means no progesterone. Again, progesterone level lowers and endometrium decreases. That is what your menstrual cycle is. Once again, we'll just recollect it. During menstrual cycle, a change that takes place in the three areas is, one is in the ureteric wall called endometrium, second one is ovary, third one is called ovarian hormones. During menstrual cycle, when menstrual cycle takes place? 3 to 5 days. During menstrual phase, what is happening in the uterus? What is happening in the ovarian hormone? Progesterone decreases. So low level of progesterone will influences or stimulate pituitary gland to produce an hormone called FSH. FSH hormone inside the ovary produce or creates that follicles. So ultimately you get Graafian follicle. When Graafian follicle is there, estrogen hormone increases, endometrium regenerated. That phase is called follicular phase. It is for 6 to 13 days. Okay, right. So now this high level of estrogen will produce or secrete an hormone called LH hormone. Whenever LH hormone is there, Graafian follicle rupture, ovum is released, ovulation. By this time, LH is playing vital role, so LH level is peak during ovulatory phase. Don't forget it. LH hormone, that is called LH surge. Surge is more. LH will be more during ovulatory phase, and that ovulatory phase is only 1 day. That is on the 14th day. Only 14th day, the ovum will be ready for fertilization for 24 hours. Okay, right. Next, this, if it is not getting, it is fertilized means the Graafian follicle second is converted into a structure called corpus luteum. Whenever corpus luteum is there, progesterone increases, endometrium made more stronger. If fertilization is there, that thing maintains as it is. If there is no fertilization, corpus luteum will convert into another structure called corpus albicon. That time, the endometrium level decreases. Corpus luteum is there, progesterone will be there. Graafian follicle is there, estrogen will be there. Graafian follicle is not there, estrogen. Right. And same, when corpus luteum is not there, progesterone is not there. So that time, this corpus albicon will be there, getting ready for another cycle. Progesterone level lowers. So this again, lower progesterone level will again stimulate the follicle to produce. Understand? So this is what the menstrual cycle is. Now take your book. Take your book, page number 19. I just read it for you. Mark the keywords. Menstrual phase. Page number 19. Page number 19. The menstrual cycle is otherwise called as ovarian cycle. Why ovarian cycle? Because it is taking place in the ovary changes, right? And it is every 28 to 29 days during the reproductive life of the female from menarche to menopause. You know what is menarche? What is menarche? The first menstrual cycle after the puberty. First one is called the menarche. End one is called menopause. Very good. Now the cycle of event starts from one menstrual period till the next one is called the menstrual cycle, during which the cyclic change occurs in the one mark question. In which wall of the uterus? Endometrium. Every month then cyclic menstruation is an indicator of normal reproductive phase. The menstrual cycle should happen every 28 days, once in every 28 days. That means the reproductive life is healthy. Right. Now follicular phase, menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, luteal phase. We talked what is that luteal phase. Why? Because corpus luteum is secreting that. So it is called luteal phase. Another it is given secretory. It is there no luteal phase, otherwise called as secretory. That means and the corpus luteum will remain there till pregnancy. If it is pregnancy, it will be there. So when the female is undergoing pregnancy, when the child is in the womb of the mother, the child needs some nutrition. So uterus wall will supply some nutrition, secrete some nutrition to the fetus. That is why this phase is called secretory phase. You know why it is called luteal phase? Because of the corpus luteum. Why luteal phase is also called the secretory phase? At the time of pregnancy, corpus luteum will remain, persist. Progesterone will be there. So the uterus muscle will supply some nutrition to the developing fetus. That is what it is called secretory. It will secrete some nutrition. Is that clear? Right. Next one. The menstrual phase. The cycle starts with the menstrual phase when menstrual flow occurs at least for 1 more question, 3 to 5 days. Menstrual flow is due to the breakdown of endometrial lining of the uterus and its blood vessel due to 1 more question, decline. That means reduces the level of progesterone and estrogen. Menstruation occurs only if the released ovum is not fertilized. If it is fertilization, no menstrual cycle. Okay, that's what we studied. So absence of menstruation may be an indicator of pregnancy. If there is no menstrual cycle, it may be pregnancy. Okay, or it may be sometime due to stress, hormonal disorder and anemia. So these are all the absence of menstrual cycle. Clear, man? Right. Second part, follicular phase is otherwise called as proliferation. Proliferation is nothing but development of the follicles are called proliferation. Development. Okay. So follicular phase is also called as proliferation, development phase. The follicular phase, follicular means what it talks about? Talks about the primary, secondary, tertiary, Graafian follicles. Here, the follicular phase extends from the 5th day of the cycle until the time of ovulation. What is ovulation? Removal of the ovum from the Graafian follicles, from the ovary. When ovulation occurs? Which date? 14. So that means within the bracket you write 14. So that means follicular phase is from 5th day to 14th day, but actually taking place between 6 to 13. That is what I have mentioned. Okay. This phase ends at 5th. That means follicular phase will start at the end of 5th day. Okay. And this ends on 13. That means beginning of the 14th. In between I have written 6 to 13. Don't get confused. Follicular phase exactly means 6 to 13. Begins end of 5th. Ends beginning of 14. Understand? That is what I have written. Don't get confused. Okay. So those details you have to write it. All these are interior 1 mark question. Right. So during this phase, the primary follicle in the ovary grows to become a fully matured Graafian follicle, and simultaneously the endometrium regenerate and proliferate. These changes in the ovary and the uterus are induced by the secretion of gonadotropic hormone. That means where the gonadotropics are? Pituitary or gonads? Gonadotropic hormones. Pituitary hormones called FSH and LH. Can you list out what are all gonadotropic hormones? FSH and LH. Very good. Can you list out what are all gonadal hormones? Okay, very good. Beautiful. Right. So now, which increases gradually during follicular phase. It stimulates follicular development and secretion of estrogen by this Graafian follicles. The follicle is called Graafian follicle. There you write one word. The follicle below that, Graafian follicles. So ovulation, estrogen is increased by the follicle cell called dash. Which one? Primary, secondary, tertiary, Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle. Now you understood, no? Super. Right. So next one, ovulatory phase. You know what is ovulatory? Ovulation means removal of ovum from the Graafian follicle. Ovum means secondary follicle. Okay. Right. Begins only 1 day, 14th day, ovulatory phase. Right. So both FSLH and FS attain peak level, one more question, peak level. That time FS and LH will be peak. So far we have not studied about FS reduction. Okay, FS is stimulated, that means FS is there. LH will be always peak. So the follicular ovulatory phase, we will have those both hormones, LH and FH. Attain peak level in the middle of the cycle, that is about 14th day. So one more question. When FSH and LH will be high, peak 14th day. That phase is called ovulatory phase. Very good, man. Right. So maximum secretion of LH during the mid cycle called, that is LH third LH is more. Right. So induces whenever LH is more, it will rupture the Graafian follicle releasing ovum. Understand? Graafian follicle is there, you have estrogen. Graafian follicle is ruptured, estrogen level decreases. Who is responsible for rupturing? LH. So, which hormone influences ovulation? That is the question. Which hormone influences ovulation? Right. LH hormone is responsible for ovulation. Ovulation is done by an hormone called dash. What is the answer? Ovulation is done by an hormone called LH hormone. Very good. Ovulation means LH. What is ovulation? You know, rupturing the Graafian follicle, removing the ovum from the ovum. Good. Right. So, induce the rupture of Graafian follicle and releases of the ovum. Ovum means what kind of ovum it is? Secondary oocyte. Don't forget it. Not egg, secondary oocyte. From the ovary wall into the peritoneal cavity. Peritoneal cavity means fallopian tube. That we will talk tomorrow. Now, tomorrow when we talk about, you should remember this one. Who is responsible for Graafian follicle? FSH hormone. Responsible. When FSH is there, what hormone is increased? Estrogen. Graafian follicle rupture is done by an hormone called LH. Ovulation is done by an hormone called LH. All this thing you should know. Now ovumes come out, secondary oocyte. Where it goes, what is happening, all this tomorrow we will discuss. Now what we discussed, ovum is not there. We are not talking about the ovum now. We were talking about only the ruptured Graafian follicle. Ruptured Graafian follicle undergoes a structure called carpus. That time progesterone increases, indication of pregnancy. If pregnancy is there, it will remain as a carpus luteum. Why? Because already one ovum is there ready for fertilization. Embryo is going forming. Carpus luteum is there means it is an indication of pregnancy. Understand? That means already one ovum is fertilized. So we need not have one more ovum, one more egg. So that is why carpus luteum. So indirectly carpus luteum suppresses ovulation. Understand? Ovulation is what? Coming out of ovum. Now carpus luteum what it is doing? It is not allowing the ovum to come out. Why? Already one ovum is there. It is fertilized. That is what carpus luteum progesterone. So if it is fertilized, we does not want one more ovum to fertilize. Understand? So another ovum should not come out till the ovum is completing its cycle. Whether menstrual cycle or pregnancy. Pregnancy means 9 months. No ovum should come out. Menstrual cycle means till menstrual cycle happens, no ovum should come out. So indirectly ovulation is suppressed by a structure called carpus luteum, hormone called why? Beautiful. Why? Correct. Why progesterone suppresses ovulation? Because carpus luteum is there, sir. Whenever carpus luteum is there, progesterone is there. Same, but progesterone is a layer. Carpus luteum is a layer, progesterone is a hormone. Both the same function. See, since I have written progesterone here, does not mean carpus luteum and progesterone are separated. Carpus luteum, wherever it is, on it, progesterone is there. For your understanding, I have just pulled it down. Understand? So, role of carpus luteum will not allow the ovum to come out with the help of an hormone called progesterone. So, progesterone indirectly doing a function of suppressing ovulation. Carpus luteum doing a function called suppressing ovulation and maintenance pregnancy. Ovulation suppression is done in ovary. Pregnancy is maintained in the uterus. Understand? These are all interior one mark questions. Interior one mark questions. Book only 10%. 90% every word you have to study interiorly and application oriented questions only will be asked. Okay, so we know what is carpus luteum, we know what is progesterone, but we know it is a pregnancy hormone, the ovum should not come out. But what is actually happening? Carpus luteum will not allow another ovum to come out. Okay, so right there, during this process, ovulation is done by hormone called LH hormone. At the time of peak, it will be Now what is happening to the graphene follicle? Undergoing a structure called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum will not allow the ovum to come out. That means it will suppress the ovulation. So there is one more question. Progesterone as well as corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is a layer. Progesterone is a hormone. The hormone which suppresses ovulation is called hormone which suppresses ovulation. Hormone. Okay, right. The next one is called luteal secretory phase. During luteal phase, the remaining part of the graphene follicle is transformed into another structure called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes large amount of progesterone, which is essential for maintenance of the endometrium. Why? Because endometrium is made more stronger by an hormone called progesterone. Estrogen developed. Estrogen is more, becomes strong. Progesterone is more, becomes strongest. Okay, right. So that is what. So if fertilization takes place, one more question. It paves the way for implantation of the fertilized ovum. The ovum coming there and it has to follow, it has to go all the track. Finally, this ovum should come and settle in the endometrium. That is what we study. Okay, implantation. So that is done by this hormone. The uterine wall secrete nutritive fluid in the uterus for the fetus. So this phase is called secretory phase. During pregnancy, all event of menstrual cycle stop and there is no menstruation. In the absence of fertilization, if fertilization is a corpus luteum, I told you. If there is no fertilization, what is happening? The corpus luteum degenerates completely and lead to a structure called corpus albicon. Public 2 mark question it is. What is the role of corpus albicon? It initiates and disintegrate of the endometrium, leading to menstruation, making the next cycle. Whenever corpus luteum is there, corpus albicon is there, I told you progesterone is not there. So when progesterone is not there, endometrium degenerates. Understand? You follow diagram part, same thing will be explained in diagram part. Okay? Please take down these notes. It is highly helpful for you. Clear? Then even I prepare this notes and give you during at the time of revision. For studying purpose now, take this notes. If you study this chart, over menstrual cycle you can understand. Correct? No? It's very simplified. Right. From the beginning onwards. Once. Okay? Close your books. Take your note. I will give you 5 1 marks for your recap. Okay? Easy questions. Okay, right. Before that, I just revise. Once again. Listen. Right. We studied about menstrual cycle. A menstrual cycle that changes takes place in 3 areas. Number 1, uterus. Happens in the endometrium. What happened to endometrium? Regenerate or degeneration. Second one, changes in the ovary. That is development of follicle cells. Third one, ovarian hormone called estrogen progesterone. Increases or decreases. In menstrual cycle, they takes place in 4 different stages. Number 1 is called menstrual phase. Number 2 is called follicular phase. Number 3, ovulation phase. Number 4, luteal or secretory phase. Menstrual phase takes place between 3 to 5 days. The total menstrual cycle takes place for 28 days. It starts from puberty, ends up to menopause. Puberty 11 to 14 years. The first menstrual phase is called menopause. The end one is called menopause. 45 to 50 years. Menstrual cycle do not take place in these are the reasons. These are the stages. When? At the time of pregnancy, at the time of lactation, at the time of stress, and then at the time of hormonal disorder. The last one is at the time of anemia. Okay, no menstrual cycle. Clear? If corpus luteum is there, definitely there should be an indication of pregnancy. Why? Progesterone is there. If pregnancy is not there, if the egg is not fertilized, that means the corpus luteum will undergo a change is called corpus albicon. Okay, so at corpus albicon, progesterone level decreases. That is what I have not written anything. Corpus albicon. So you should write here corpus albicon. If I write beginning itself, you will not understand. That is why this box I left empty. So you understand? Leave this box empty, you can understood that corpus luteum only lead to progesterone level decreases. So endometrium is not there. Right. Second phase is called follicular phase. It is from between 6 to 13 days. Actually, it begins at end of the 15th, beginning of the 14th. How many days ovum remains live inside the female reproductive tract? Only, that's what ovulatory phase is only 1 day. 1 day day, 24 hours, that's all. Okay, within that time the egg should get fertilized. Otherwise, it will move to the uterus for undergoing menstrual cycle. Understand, right? All these things we will talk when we talk about the fertilization, right? So, the low level of progesterone increases stimulating hormone called FSH. And you know the role of follicle stimulating hormones in the ovary. By the time estrogen increases, endometrium regenerates. Now, this phase 66 to 13 days. Whenever the estrogen is high, LH hormone is induced. LH hormone will be having peak surge so that Graafian follicle ruptures, ovulation happens. Whenever ovulation happens and LH is there, the ovulatory phase is for 14 days, and this leads to another temporary structure called corpus luteum, and that what we have discussed. So the luteal phase is also called as secretory phase, and it is for 15 to 28 days. Clear? Right. Any doubt regarding this? You understood? Very, very, very important public 5-mark question. Tomorrow itself, study and come. Right? Take down question number 1. Question number 1. In a healthy female, ovulation occurs in dash day. In a healthy female, ovulation occurs in dash days. Okay, number 2. The first menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty, and that is called dash. The first menstrual cycle begins at the time of puberty. That first menstrual cycle is called dash. Okay. Third question. Endometrium of the uterus are broken down by the decline of hormone called dash. The endometrium of the uterus is removed or broken down by the decrease or decline of the hormone called dash. Which hormone is responsible? Okay. Fourth question. In the absence of fertilization, corpus luteum degenerate and change into another structure called. In the absence of fertilization, corpus luteum degenerate and change into another structure called. Okay. My last question. In which phase of the menstrual cycle? In which stage of the menstrual cycle the hormone called LH attains its peak level? Okay? Right. Completed? Check the answer. Number 1. In a healthy female, ovulation occurs in dash days. 14 days. Ovulation means 14. Menstrual cycle means 20. Very good. Beautiful. How many of you correct? Good. Second, the first menstrual phase begins at the puberty, and that first menstrual cycle is called as menarche. Very good. Beautiful. Can you tell me which age group between? Endometrium of the uterus are broken down by the decline of an hormone called progesterone. Actually, endometrium is not there, means both level. During menstrual cycle, both hormone reduces. Progesterone and estrogen. Because estrogen level, there is cycle reduces. Okay, right. So decline. Decline of progesterone. In the absence of fertilization, corpus luteum degenerate and undergo another structure called corpus albicon. The last question. In which phase of the menstrual cycle LH attains its peak level? Ovulatory. Okay. So that's all. Put your marks on the top. So tomorrow when you come, please study and come your menstrual cycle in detail. Clear? Right.